Good afternoon, I am Precious Mzea Sakaleji. Welcome to Camnet TV Midday News. The headlines. ECZ partially lifts campaign ban slapped on the UPND and PF. Government orders closure of all bars and nightclubs for 2 weeks. In international news, Ethiopia declares ceasefire as rebels retake Tigray capital. Join me with the Midday News in detail after this commercial.
Our achievements in the health sector. As the Patriotic Front government, we have recruited and deployed 27,000 nurses and other health personnel across the country to provide the much-needed healthcare, including the fight against COVID-19, child healthcare, as well as maternity care to all parts of the country. Vote for Edgar Chagwa Lungu and the PF that have brought you change.
And now the Midday News in detail. Ministry of Local Government has with immediate effect closed all bars, nightclubs, taverns and casinos for a period of 14 days subject to the review. Ministry of Permanent Secretary Matthew Ngulube says the said businesses will only operate on takeaway basis. Mr. Ngulube says the decision to close the businesses has been necessitated due to their refusal to comply with the directive that they operate from Friday to Sunday evening. Meanwhile, Ndola City Council Public Relations Officer Fabi Mwandaba says 5 people have been apprehended for obstructing officers from carrying out their COVID-19 inspections.
In nightclubs, among other businesses, are proving to be notorious when it comes to them adhering to the directive by the head of state through the Secretary to Cabinet, Dr. Simon Miti, that they only operate from 18 to 22 hours. Local Government Permanent Secretary last week directed all the local authorities across the country to ensure that they beef up their compliance inspection levels to ensure that no one is abrogating the directive. But this has not been easy for the local authorities across the country who have been having a hard time at ensuring that the bars and nightclubs adhere to the guidelines. The Ndola City Council was conducting inspections of compliance levels since Saturday through to Sunday, where 10 bars and 2 nightclubs have been closed for abrogating the guidelines by not closing their premises at 22 hours.
It is quite disappointing that many bars and nightclubs are going against the presidential directive on the stipulated hours of operating and the preventive guidelines of COVID-19. The combined team from council and the state police closed down 10 bars and 2 nightclubs for abrogating the law. We would like to warn Ndola residents and bar owners and nightclub owners to adhere to the COVID-19 guidelines.
And Mkoshi Town Council has also closed 31 bars and nightclubs that were equally found not adhering to the guidelines. Mkoshi Town Council Public Relations Officer Clarence Kaoma adds that Zion Church is among institutions that risk closure, as they have been convening a conference for 8 days while camping at the church premises, despite government directing that churches only meet for an hour.
And during the operation, we saw us visit a total of 91 bars. 39 of these bars did not comply with the stipulated guidelines, and this translated to about 43% of non-adherence, leaving only 57% adhering to the COVID-19 guidelines. We as a local authority also visited Zion Church, that to our surprise has not met all the necessary documentations, and so it has been operating illegally. As I speak to you, they've been having gatherings.
The behavior by liquor businesses has now angered the government, who have announced that bars, nightclubs, taverns and casinos have been closed indefinitely for a period of 14 days and will only operate on a takeaway basis subject to review.
Firstly, all bars, taverns, nightclubs and casinos shall be closed and will only operate on a takeaway basis for the next 14 days subject to review. The proprietors of these businesses should ensure adherence to this directive. This does not mean that people should buy their drinks and then park in the car parks and start drinking from their cars or around the premises. Should any premise be found allowing individuals to drink from the car parks, businesses will have their licenses revoked.
The Permanent Secretary adds that marketeers should also ensure that they are masked up whenever they visit or trade at the market before government is forced to take a step against them.
Government will continue to monitor the situation in markets and bus stations. Should there be continued failure by the members of the public visiting these places to adhere to the rules, government may be forced to close up the buckets and the bus stations. Fellow countrymen, women and youths, government will continue to work in a multi-sector approach to monitor compliance and adherence to the COVID-19 health guidelines in all the public places.
The battle against COVID-19 can only be won if all citizens play their part and ensure they follow the prescribed guidelines. Prudence Chota, reporting for Camnet TV News.
The Electoral Commission of Zambia, ECZ, has lifted the campaign suspension slapped on the United Party for National Development, UPND, and the Patriotic Front, PF, in Namwala, Nakonde and Mpulungu districts. ECZ Chief Electoral Officer Patrick Nshindano, however, says the suspension on campaigns in Lusaka province will only be partially lifted as the Commission is not satisfied with the conduct of the two political parties in Lusaka. Mr. Nshindano says that the Commission has received a number of instances by the two political party cadres in Lusaka that are still under investigations. The Chief Electoral Officer adds that other reports of violence have been reported from other provinces which he says are under investigations and that appropriate action will be taken after investigations are concluded.
The Commission has reviewed the situation and would like to announce that we have fully lifted the suspension of campaigns for the PF and UPND in the following districts, that is in Mpulungu, Nakonde and Namwala, that is 3 districts, following the satisfactory conduct of the two political parties in these jurisdictions. The Commission greatly thanks the leadership in these districts and call on them to really uphold the peace that they've embarked on. It is quite commendable. The Commission, however, is not fully satisfied with the conduct of the Patriotic Front and indeed the United Party for National Development in Lusaka. The Commission has received a number of incidences in Lusaka that are under investigation. And this is quite saddening. We have reports of maiming of each other in terms of political party cadres and other incidences which have been reported to the Commission, and we are working closely with the Zambia Police and other agencies to quickly conclude these investigations. Therefore, the Commission has only partially lifted the suspension in Lusaka district. This means that all physical campaigns in Lusaka remain suspended. However, in addition to the sport adverts and the documentaries that were allowed during the suspension period on various media platforms, the Commission will allow the two political parties to air their programs on radio and television, as well as publish articles in the newspapers and indeed any other activity that does not involve physical campaigns.
Amnesty International has charged that years of intensifying repression have pushed Zambia to the brink of a human rights crisis ahead of the August 12th general elections. Amnesty International Director for East and Southern Africa, Depros Mchena, says Zambia has experienced a systematic erosion of the right of freedom of expression in the past 5 years. Mr. Mchena says authorities have abused the law of criminalized peaceful dissent, charging critics with a wide range of offences, including criminal defamation, incitement of public disorder, and sedition. He was speaking during a virtual launch of a report dubbed Ruling by Ye and Repression Amnesty International on Monday, focused on Zambia, highlighting a number of issues ranging from freedom of expression and public killings.
Suppression of human rights, police killings, crackdown of human rights, violations of the right of freedom of assembly, violation of the right of association. These are some of the things highlighted in the latest report by Amnesty International focusing on Zambia. In this report, according to Amnesty International's Director for East and Southern Africa, Depros Mchena, says years of intensifying repression have put Zambia to the brink of a human rights rights crisis ahead of the August presidential election. Under suppression of human rights findings, Zambia has experienced a systematic erosion of the right to freedom of expression in the past 5 years. Authorities have abused the law to criminalize peaceful dissent, charging critics with a wide range of offenses including criminal defamation, incitement of public disorder and sedition. For example, according to the report, on the 9th of March 2020, police arrested a 15-year-old boy in Kapirimposhi and charged him with 3 counts of criminal libel after he allegedly criticized President Lungu on Facebook. He is currently awaiting trial. Under police killings, the report revealed that the crackdown has also led to an escalation of excessive use of force by the police, which has been fatal in some cases. On the 22nd of December 2020, police shot dead 2 unarmed people at a gathering of opposition supporters, among other highlighted issues. Amnesty International has therefore recommended that the Zambian government immediately end the crackdown of freedom of expression association by removing all underlined restrictions on the rights of people in Zambia to freely receive and disseminate independent information and express peaceful dissent. The recommendations are: ensure that non-governmental groups can operate freely without undue interference. Amend the IBA Act of 2010 to remove the arbitrary closure of media highlights. Amend the relevant provisions of the Societies Act to remove the sections that empower the Registrar of Societies to deny the registration of new associations or deregister existing associations without objective criteria. Liseli Kanyanga Mubanga, Camnet TV News in Lusaka.
Independent churches of Zambia chairperson Bishop Masupa David has urged the churches across the country to avoid politicizing their respective services as the country prepares for elections. In an interview with Camnet TV, Bishop Masupa has condemned the tendency of the clergy giving platform to political leaders to advance their political remarks, malice and propaganda. He says the church is a place of worship and not a mean by which politicians use for political mileage, given that the church caters for people of different political affiliation.
Since time immemorial, politicians have used the church as a tool for their political mileage. This trend has been observed in recent months as the country gets near the polls. The political parties have on a number of occasions used the church as a platform for their political advantage, as observed by some stakeholders. The Independent Church of Zambia, ICOZ, President Bishop David Masupa has therefore urged the churches to avoid the politicizing of their respective church services.
We have seen a tendency of the politicians who were not even visiting the churches. Now they've come up with a system where they are visiting churches, and at the end of the day, instead of visiting the churches, to go and sit in the pew just because of a small token that they have, they want to be given an altar or a platform to come and address the church. I think that is wrong. We need to take cognizance of the fact that in that church there are people with different political opinions and affiliations. So when you go to that church, simply go and sit in that pew, and the least you can ask is for a prayer.
Meanwhile, Bishop Masupa has called on all religious groups to preach and foster peace as the country approaches the general elections. Speaking in the same interview, ICO's president further encouraged the churches to tighten the fight against COVID-19 by avoiding the handling of physical money meant for offerings and instead use electronic means to avoid transmission of the virus.
We are aware that some churches cannot afford to send that money using bank, electronic systems, even mobile money. If you are found in that kind of a situation, we want to advise the church, especially the remote churches, that you need to have a hand sanitizer at hand, or just a dish of water and soap. Immediately you receive that money and you finish counting, quickly wash your hands and then put that money somewhere and take it to the bank.
Alex Shimba, reporting for Camnet TV, Lusaka.
Getting into our Midday International news, after nearly 8 months of fighting and displacement, the conflict in Ethiopia's Tigray region has taken a new turn. Last year, the federal government declared victory over the Tigrayans People's Liberation Front after seizing the regional capital, Mekelle. 7 months followed, in which thousands were killed. Then it had all changed on Monday when the TPLF took the regional capital Mekelle back. The government-appointed administration fled and then asked for a ceasefire.
When Ethiopian government troops took control of the city of Mekelle last year, Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed declared victory over the Tigrayan People's Liberation Front. 7 months of conflict followed. Thousands have been killed. And then it all changed on Monday when the TPLF took Mekelle back. The government-appointed administration fled and then asked for a ceasefire.
We ask in the name of Tigray and all peace-loving people, the federal government, for a ceasefire based on humanity in such a way that prevents further damage so that it is possible for people to find respite and become part of the solution.
Among the most recent deaths were around 40 people killed in an airstrike last week. The army said those killed were fighters. Survivors said the bomb hit a market. Around the same time, the TPLF began its offensive to retake Mekelle, which is the capital of the Tigray region.
Mekelle is fully under the control of our forces, government forces. And the legitimately elected government of Tigray is back in control of the capital in Tigray.
When Ethiopia held elections last week, Tigray was one of 4 out of the country's 10 regions that didn't vote. The conflict began partly because the elections, due last year, were delayed. Before that, the TPLF had dominated Ethiopia's government and military for nearly 30 years, until Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed took power 3 years ago. A power struggle followed, which erupted into a civil war. The conflicts displaced nearly 2 million people in Tigray. There were widespread reports of attacks on civilians, burning of crops and looting. The UN says that's left 90% of the population in urgent need of food. It said there's already a famine and it's expected to get worse. Doctors Without Borders said 3 of its staff were killed last week. UNICEF says government troops entered its office in Mekelle on Monday and dismantled communications equipment.
We condemn any and all attacks on humanitarian workers and assets and remind again all parties of their obligations under international humanitarian law. All parties must ensure the protection of civilians and that all humanitarian assistance provided by the United Nations is provided according to humanitarian principles.
Much of the conflict has been fought in small towns and villages where rights groups say thousands of civilians have been killed. People are waiting to see if the ceasefire will bring peace and the help they desperately need. Malcolm Webb, Al Jazeera.
Well, that news item brings us to the end of Camnet TV Media News, but before we go, here are the headlines once again. ECZ partially lifts campaign ban slapped on the United Party for National Development and the Patriotic Front. Government orders closure of all bars and nightclubs for 2 weeks. And in international news, Ethiopia declares ceasefire as rebels retake Tigray capital. Thank you for joining me. I am Precious Mzea Sakalaji. Remember to always wash your hands for at least 20 seconds or use alcohol-based hand sanitizer, wear your mask and avoid crowded places. Stay safe and good afternoon.